Hey there, this is Braden, also known as Gimp Know-How, back from a very long hiatus, and I'm going to be starting a new tutorial series. I'll have an update video, and in addition I'm uploading 2 other tutorial videos at the same time, sort of like a 3 tutorial video series, like a welcome back type of tutorial series, but I plan on making videos regularly again, and this is the first photo manipulation that we'll be making, sort of like a head in the clouds type of thing. So yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the tutorial. You'll need a few stock images. And yeah, let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to be doing is go ahead and open up the image you're going to be using as your base image. In this case, I found this lovely face image on a stock image website that has commercial licenses available for free. I've also chosen a fluorine, clouds, and balloon image that I'm going to be adding to that as well. These will be uploaded in the description for you to follow along if you'd like exactly the same image manipulation that I'm making right now, but of course there's nothing stopping you from making your own as well. I'll have links to suggested sites in the description that you can peruse at your leisure. But yeah, so this is the main image that we're going to be using today. Right on top of this, I'm going to go ahead and open up that wood image as a layer, so make sure you click open as layer, and then we have the fluorine image. This just has the advantage of being like automatically the right size. These images are quite large, but make sure you do find images that are relatively of similar sizes, or if you do have different sizes, make sure one is much bigger than the other, because you don't want to be stretching images to pixelate them. So right off the bat, let's go ahead and add an alpha channel to this. That'll allow us to make transparency in this layer. Let's go layer to image size, so we get rid of this boundary, and then let's cut off around the half of this that we don't need, so right about here. I'm going to try to cut on a border of one of these planks of wood, so go ahead and delete that as well. And then you can go ahead and press Ctrl-Shift-A to get rid of that selection. Alternatively, of course, you can go to Select None. So we're going to move this in place, and as you can see right now, his head is a little bit curved and these boards are not. So if we were just to overlay these boards right now, well, for one, it kind of turns his skin like a sickly color of orange, like an Oompa Loompa. We are going to desaturate it, but we want to be able to make a sort of curvature in the boards. So we're going to accomplish this by using the eye warp tool. So first, let's go ahead and go Filters, Distorts, and eye warp. There we are. You do have to be a little careful with eye warp, because when you don't use it with a very large brush, you get sort of a spirally type effect. So we're just going to make the deform radius massive, like almost as big as like 185. And I'm going to put the deform amount down to like 9 or 10. And then starting at the very bottom, yeah, you can already see how massive this is. I'm just going to move very slowly up. There we go. And we'll allow that to apply. And now you can see that the boards, it's not a perfect illusion, and if you wanted to, you could go in and move the boards down slightly on the side of the head, but that requires quite a bit of trial and error, since every time you need to do it, you need to redo the eye warp filter, and I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that for the tutorial. But now, in order to fix his skin looking so orange, we're just going to go ahead and desaturate that by going Colors, Desaturate, and just leave it on lightness. That's fine. Now we're actually starting to get a pretty good looking effect already. We could potentially make this a little more strong, but obviously the things that need to be fixed right now are the fact that these boards are going off into his hair and his ears. And that's relatively easily fixed with a fuzzy eraser, so make sure that you're on a fuzzy brush. Crank up the size quite a bit. You don't have to worry about this too terrible much, because it's pretty hard to see any errors you make, because it's quite a subtle effect on overlay. But I'm just going to try to make sure I brush off all of the most obviously offending spots. And also, I don't want it to go down quite so low, because if it goes past the eyes, you sort of lose the illusion that it's curving correctly on the head. And so we'll just try to erase it in such a way that makes it not super obvious that it's being erased by a fuzzy brush like this, but at the same time, I think something like that looks just about fine. Alright, for the next step, we're going to be cutting this out. So now that we have the flooring all laid away, we now need to cut out the hole where we're going to be able to see whatever you're featuring inside this person's head. In this example, I'm putting clouds in, as you saw before, but it could be a galaxy, it could be gears, it could be, whatever. So we're going to do this with the Paths tool, and this is a somewhat effort-intensive process. Basically what you'll be doing is you will be going and cutting along the boards themselves, using them as a reference for how you're going to be able to cut the actual hole out. It does help if you follow the natural little lines that these boards have, but of course that's not mandatory, and you can definitely change it based on like the sort of general shape you want, as well as like the wood stock. I think it typically looks better if there's a large amount of open space in the middle, as well as a lot of boards sort of reaching over, kind of like spidering out, as opposed to like big blocks, so like lots of individual little guys going over. So that's gonna be kind of what I'm trying to accomplish. By the way, in order to use this Paths tool, you hold Control. So you first set the point, and then let's say I move a point over here and I'm bending it by holding and dragging. So now I hold Control and then move this anchor over to the point, and that allows me to create right angles. Because otherwise, if I just immediately after making a curve made another point, Gimp would automatically attempt to smooth the curve, and that wouldn't look as like, that's not what we're wanting, of course. We do want those hard curves to simulate them being boards. The other small detail that you want to watch out for is that if you make an uneven board like this, I guess it could technically work like based on what you want, but I typically think it looks much better if you really try to emulate the exact angle that you're going to find the rest of the boards at. So when you do kind of go off of pattern, just make sure you really try to pay attention to the angle you're using. So I'm going to cut because this is a pretty long process and I have a relatively limited amount of time on YouTube, but when I come back I'll have the path finished. Now we need to sort of extrude the boards, or make sure they look a little more 3D than they do right now, because right now they look something like paper, right? Because there's no depth to the boards. So in order to accomplish this, go ahead and duplicate that black layer you made before. Right click, alpha to selection, get the paint bucket tool, and let's fill this in with a very noticeable color, something like a bright red, just so we can very easily see the difference. Deselect that with Control-Shift-A, and then grab the Move tool, and we're going to move it slightly down and to the right. And you can sort of imagine like these black bars right here are going to become the extrusion. We're going to make them brown and apply a few effects to them, and they'll be the 3D depth of the boards. So now that we have this layer right here sort of as a guideline, I'm going to move mine about like here. Duplicate the black layer then one more time, and this black layer then we're actually going to want to make the desired dark brown of our final image. So go back to the face layer, get your color select tool up here, and select an area that has skin tone on it about like this. And then go ahead and make this color both a little darker and a little more saturated, because of course it is in the shadows and needs to be a little darker. Now on this duplicated black layer we can alpha to selection that and color it in with that brown color, which makes the brown right there. We're almost done. We just need to now right click on the red, alpha to selection the red, select the brown layer again, and then delete. And that deletes the silhouette of the red from the brown, and we're left with exactly the type of shape we want. We can go ahead and delete the red layer now, and you can see that what we've created right here is this sort of cutout of exactly the extrusions that we want. But of course it's not perfect yet, because if you see, we still have these little areas that aren't properly being displayed. So in order to fix that, if you wanted to be exact, you could take the Paths tool and then make a little triangle around each one of these and do the same process that we did before. But since I'm just kind of hacking this together relatively quickly, I'm going to go ahead and use my paintbrush tool, click, hold Shift, and then click down again for straight lines. And yes, this is technically over the wood right now, but we can definitely fix that with just a quick selection later. So don't worry about being too terribly clean as far as going over the wood goes, because we're going to select the black layer and delete all of that a little bit later. Alternatively, you could just select the black layer before you even start paintbrushing. I guess it saves you a step, but I forgot to do that. So it's not a huge deal. It takes around 10 seconds or so, so we'll just fix it up relatively quickly. I think that got most of the offending areas. Yeah, that's fine. So let's go ahead and select this layer right here, and then just delete, invert it first, Command I or Control I, and then delete that from there. And deselect, and now you can see that we have a relatively good looking set of brown lines. We are still missing one key aspect of the depth though, and that's going to be the extra shadows that you'll see along here, because obviously the light isn't hitting all of these 3D surfaces evenly. So let's go ahead and select this brown layer one more time, make a new layer on top of it, and that's again Control-Shift-N or New Layer button. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a pretty large fuzzy brush. That's too large. I don't know, something like 18. And using the Shift again, I'm just going to, we're on the same brown color. Using Shift again, I'm going to drag it along the corners that ought to be brown. So something like that. And you want to do that on all of these surfaces in order to create even more depth to the 3D image. And of course you don't need to be super exact when you're doing this. Again, it's just pretty rough. It will look better the more time you spend on it, but even just giving the rough impression drastically improves the look of the boards as opposed to what they looked like before. And the reason I'm doing it on this side as well is that you could also conceivably make it so that the bottom of the boards are darker, but then you would need to do more. So I'm just doing time saving. I think it also fits with the general lighting scheme. Even if we're not like 100% lighting accurate, it should still end up looking okay. And you can see that I'm sort of making a mistake here. You want it to line up at a 45-degree angle on these angles, or on these corners. So you can just go ahead and fix that with the eraser tool whenever you make any mistakes. Getting pretty close to the end. Oh, I forgot one brown part over here. I'll go ahead and fix that real quick. Make sure to go on your brown layer when you fix that. And color select tool with O, P for paintbrush, and we'll go ahead and fix that as well. I'll need to delete that one more time. There we are. Right, so I think I got all of the correct sides, and of course that black is a little bit dark, so we can reduce the opacity a little bit, and now you can see that just adds a tremendous amount to the actual texture. One final thing that I would like to do is get some highlights going on in here. So we'll go ahead and grab this layer one more time in terms of selection, make one more final layer on top of this yet, and select a relatively large white fuzzy brush. That might be a little too large again, about like that. And we'll just go and make sort of highlights in the middle of the larger boards. In this case, I'm actually sure it's not lighting accurate, but that's okay. We can take some liberties. About like that, a little bit down, about like that, and like that. And so we'll then reduce the opacity of this, and maybe put it on overlay as well. There we go. And what happened to our black layer here? Oops, that opacity accidentally got knocked down to 0 somehow. About like that. Sure. I think that looks fine. And then the absolute last thing that we're going to be doing to this in order to complete the sort of wood effect that we have is deselect this first of all. We'll open up our wood stock one more time, open as layers. We'll get that flooring landscape or that flooring image in. And this time we're actually going to be making it quite a bit smaller because we want to preserve the detail. So Shift T for the scale tool, and then hold Control, and we'll make it relatively small, and then move it up here, and about like that. And then we'll desaturate this as well. Colors, desaturate, and zooming in a little bit. We'll set this layer mode on overlay. And then of course that obviously put it over everything, so we are going to make sure we have this layer alpha to selectioned, invert the selection, and oops, the layer isn't set to image size, so that's why we got kind of a funny boundary. Go layer, layer to image size, there we are. Now we invert the selection, and now we can delete and deselect that. And then since it is supposed to be a detail-oriented thing, we'll go colors, brightness and contrast, and we'll tone the brightness down quite a bit. And there we have sort of the wooden texture on the boards. And you can see we still have that depth. Maybe we want to make this a little bit stronger now as well. And perfect, and that should lead us splendidly into the next segment of the tutorial. So the stock images that I'm using, we can go ahead and open as layers, and the clouds image we're going to be pulling down, and we're going to be using this image for both the area in between the boards and above the head. And we'll need to expand the canvas a little bit, but we can do that a bit later. So first, let's go ahead and add an alpha channel so we can actually manipulate this layer a little more. And let's go ahead and scale this guy down a little bit. And I'm thinking something like this. We want the clouds to be relatively tiny, but at the same time we don't want it to be so tiny that you can see the mountain inside the head, at least not for my purposes. So I think something like that should suffice. And then we'll go ahead and move this into position. And we actually want this layer above the other layer. Oops. Alright, we'll just move it up this way. And maybe something like this. Let's try to make that even a tiny bit smaller yet. Try that. There we go. Yeah, that is about what we want. Perfect. Okay, so now let's go ahead and alpha to selection this. And in order to convert this, or invert this selection, you can just press Control I and then delete. And there we have some clouds, but they still look relatively flat. So actually we don't need to deselect that at all. We can just invert it again. And let's make a layer above this and grab your gradient tool and then change the gradient to FG to transparent. And then go ahead and stroke a black gradient down here, maybe a little bit stronger, maybe too strong, something like that. And then also one at the bottom, about like that. Sure. And this actually puts a lot more depth in. But one thing you'll notice is that it looks like we have placed an image behind the head as opposed to like there actually being a 3D realm of clouds. And the way that I think looks good about fixing this is when we zoom in a little bit and then we actually erase the shadow off of the clouds. So it looks then like the clouds are very much so like above the shadow. And so we can just do this quite roughly right now. And we might even need to add a little bit of shadow back in because this is just like a visibly glowing cloud. What's important is that we just lift it off of the plane of the sky because the sky is being gradiented right now. So as long as we can just make sure that this cloud stands out sort of, then we make it look like it has a whole lot more depth in the image as well. We can even do parts of this cloud over here. And maybe leave some clouds dark, but then go and brighten up other clouds. And in this way, we really pull a sense of depth into the scene. And we could even like then go back and make this cloud like slightly darker if we wanted to. And we would just do that by, well, you'd erase it and then you'd maybe paint over it again, or you would lower the opacity of the eraser brush. But for now, I think that looks pretty good. That's definitely a very glowing set of clouds right there. Yeah, maybe we should make the first one just a tiny bit darker. Yeah, so let's go ahead and alpha to selection this again, and then just do one more gradient on top. There. And then let's go ahead and deselect that. Maybe we'll reduce the opacity of that just a little bit. Okay, so it's really coming along. We can definitely see with the cloud and the bottom here where we're creating that sense of depth that we want. It almost looks like a sort of diorama or play inside the head, and that is spectacular. That's exactly what we want. However, I do think the wood effect is maybe a little weak right now, so I'm going to duplicate that layer once more, and then that's quite strong, so maybe tone the opacity down to 50%. So if we can compare right there, I think that effect makes it quite a bit more noticeable. And then one thing that I'm also going to be doing perhaps a little bit later as a finishing touch is that I'm also going to be pulling more clouds out and then putting them to the side of this person. But for now, I think that's pretty good. we'll need to increase the size of the canvas. So in order to make the canvas a little bit larger, we need to go to Image, Canvas Size, and let's add 600 pixels to this, so it's 3,930. Press Enter, and then move this box all the way down, because if you don't move it down, then it won't be applied, the extra canvas space won't be applied to the top of the image. So we'll resize that, and now you can see we have some nice transparent space on top, which is exactly what we want. And now we need to open up the image that we're going to be using on top of this person's head. So in this case, my image just happened to be the exact same image I got my clouds from. So I'm going to go File, Open as Layers, and we'll go ahead and open up this clouds image, which is luckily the exact same size as the image, or the exact size I need in order to make the effect somewhat convincing. So we'll move it to about here, where the top guy is just about to the top of the image, and then try to center it so that it matches up with his head perfectly. Now we'll right click on this and add an alpha channel. That's just general good policy, so you don't run into problems later when you try to delete something and only get black instead of transparency like you would want. And then we'll duplicate this layer, because as you can see, it's not very well blended. And just to get rid of this annoying line, you could hide the layer visibility, but you could also go Layer and then go Layer to Image Size. So now that we have this sort of where we want, we can hide the bottom layer and then hit this layer to lighten only. And we can sort of see here that it already starts blending in quite naturally with the hair, but of course, since there's nothing to lighten on the transparency, it doesn't lighten anything at all. And in order to fix that, we can, on this new layer that we made before that I don't think was filled up, I'm just going to make a square select tool selection and fill it in with a relatively dark brown color, just about like that. And then we can undo that selection. And let's go ahead and just move this up to make sure we have the maximum space possible, because we want to get all of the hair that we can get from the natural image. Great, and of course that still looks like pretty horrendous, but if we make this layer visible again, the goal then is going to be to erase parts of this image that the lighten only will replace. So if we erase right here, it's letting the lighten only layer shine through, and you can see the hair is blending quite naturally into the rock. One thing you do want to avoid is things like this area over here. You don't want to erase them too heavily, because if you do, first of all, you'll get a line like that. And secondly, the lighten only layer mode only lightens, right? So if it's a super dark area of the picture, then it's not going to lighten on top of that. But I have something else I would like to put there as well. So in order to get that something else that I'd like to put there, I'm going to take a sample or a clipping of this person's hair from the first layer. So I'm going to take a box about like this, go ahead and copy that, deselect, and then paste. So now what we have is a floating selection, which is not really a layer, so we'll go ahead and right click, put it to a new layer, and then interestingly enough, I actually found this bug: you can't move layers while recording your screen on Gimp, so that's kind of irritating, but we'll just move it down with the button 2, and then we'll move it right over here, about like this. And now we can see that we can we have some difficulties with this and the darkness being right over there. So we can erase this a little bit more and sort of have the hair. We don't want to erase too far into the brown, about like that. Oops, about like that. And we'll rotate this hair a little more to make it look a little bit more natural for the angle that it. About like that, it appears to be. And then we'll also set this hair to lighten only. And oops, I guess we can see that this brown is not quite dark enough for what we'd like. We'll go ahead and move it to almost a black. There we go. Oops. Brush a little bit smaller. And there. Okay, so now that this hair is on lighten only, we can move it to about here. And we might be able to actually duplicate this layer and maybe put it on overlay, and then erase some of the hard boundaries. Right, and so what that does is it continues to blend the hair, and even dodge might be a good layer mode to try out here. A lot of this is just going to be experimenting with the type, ooh, that looks good. It's going to be experimenting with the type of layer modes that you get that will allow you to blend the image and make it look pretty good in the end. So layer to image size. You need to be careful because when you don't get rid of that yellow boundary, then your mind sort of subconsciously thinks that it's like fine for it to have a hard edge there, when in reality it's definitely not fine for it to have a hard edge in there when it's viewed without the layer boundary. So just switch back and forth between the layers until you get more or less a relatively good blend, and honestly that is looking pretty good so far. It's a little better than just like your typical Gaussian blur blend or Gaussian blur blend. I'm still not sure after all these years how to pronounce that. The one like sort of problem area we have right here is this blue area right here, and that's what we're going to be fixing by making a layer right on top of this. Let's go ahead and sample the blue color from this normal layer, and then just with the paintbrush, maybe even sample this over here. Doesn't need to be too terribly, doesn't need to be too terribly exact. Right over here, just get like similar colors. There we are, right, and then it's got to be on top of it. Similar colors, and then just sort of drag it down until it blends with whatever image you have. And over here we'll do the same thing. Always forget. There on top. And again, you could do a much better job of it than I am doing right now, to be completely honest, by actually going with the paths tool and feathering the selection a little bit. In fact, I might actually make a tutorial on feathering and selecting around hair a little better a little bit later as well. So let's just kind of go ahead and blend this in. Fuzzy brush, fuzzy brush. One thing that I really don't like is I don't like this sort of fade right here. I think that looks quite unconvincing. So we'll go ahead and fix that as well. But then, yeah, we can even sort of just grab this sort of intermediary color right here as it sort of fades into the darker blue, and then draw that over here as well. And then we'll give this whole section a big old motion blur. And increase the length quite a bit, make the angle at a 90 to build make it up and down, because that's sort of the area we're worried about blending here. Make the length quite long. That'll take a second to blur. And now that we have it a little more successfully blurred, we can go through, get an eraser, and erase any of the parts that might be too ugly. About like that. And then also like that. Perfect. And yeah. And I think one thing that we might do as well, adding a little bit more to that black, is over here is a little bit of fuzziness that I don't particularly like. So we'll go ahead and solidify that up a little bit. And then we could even move this dodge hair layer over, copy it. And move this up 2 layers as well. And maybe set this time to lighten only. There we go. And then erase some of the edge a little bit. Ooh, we want a fuzzy brush though. There we go. Perfect. I think that looks much, much better than it did before. Great, so now that we have this sort of all blended, there's still a few areas that could use a little bit of work, like this right here. But it is starting to look quite a bit better. And actually it would help quite a bit. You wouldn't have to use this sort of rough blending technique that I used on the sides here. It would help quite a bit if you used a stock image that had a background that was similar to the sky to begin with, instead of sort of having to hack it all together at the end. I'm just going to do one final touch-up type of thing and make this blend from the blue to the yellow a little bit smoother. Let's make it on a new layer, just so I can blend it a little bit here. Do the same sort of motion blur. Now that that's completed, things are actually looking quite good, if I do say so myself, once you blend out. This sort of looks unnatural since there's a cloud here, but don't worry, we'll fix that as well. The next step is going to be adding the frontal objects to complete the scene. So that would be a hot air balloon right here, as well as a few cloud objects, and then we'll work on coloring, and then we're basically done. So yet again, we're going to go to File, Open as Layers, and I'm going to grab this clouds image. Now, you do need to be careful that you don't get too many repeating clouds on this image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the clouds probably right over here. We haven't really used any from this side yet. We'll go ahead, right-click, add an alpha channel to this, and set the layer mode on light and only. And already you can see you're getting a very ethereal effect because the light and only layer is really blending quite interestingly with the layer behind it. But we don't want that ethereal of an effect. We'd like to maintain at least some semblance of realism. By the way, I noticed myself back when I was first making this image, I get problems again without deleting this or getting rid of the layer border. So layer to image size, just to make sure that you don't like subconsciously forget something like this. Let's first start with a very large fuzzy brush, and in fact I think I'm actually going to keep this cloud over here. I'm just going to work on it very carefully. This one's inside the head, so we definitely don't want to keep that. And do watch out for little floaties as well. Little blue floaties like this. Like they're quite easy to ignore, but they actually can look not the best at the end. So we'll leave this here. I don't actually mind that cloud there, I might keep it there. You do kind of see the tip of it, but I don't think you put that together that easily. Let's definitely get the clouds out of the way of his eye. There. We'll go about like that, and of course, the more time you spend blending these clouds, the better of a result you're going to get. Fortunately for me, at least, though, this sort of dreamy look fits with the dreamy look of the composition as a whole, so I don't need to worry too carefully about getting these edges. And I have the added benefit as well of the fact that it kind of makes the composition seem more blue. And actually we can just strategically position these clouds so they like hide our mistakes, which is definitely something you should do, because honestly blending around hair is a very time intensive and honestly not the most fun or easy process in the world. I still have trouble with it all the time. So just go around these edges a little bit. But you don't want to, the thing you do need to be careful about is that if you rub off the edges of the cloud too hard, it still looks okay, but it doesn't look as good as if you leave the clouds to their natural edges. So try where possible to erase the blue, but don't erase too much from the cloud, because then it looks like a white smear instead of a cloud, and we definitely want to retain that puffy look. So there we go. Those clouds are actually looking pretty nice. I actually like a lot how this cloud kind of stops or goes in front of the head, but I also really like that rocky silhouette right there. So we're just gonna go ahead and actually no, let's just erase this guy. Sorry, bud. I like that rocky silhouette a lot more than I like the cloud's positioning there. And oops, there was sort of that hard border, so we'll, I'm gonna make the cloud. I'll just erase the cloud. Alright, that's fine. A little bit farther in, let's see, we're missing a few little random blue bits. They do kind of look like lens flares, so it's not the biggest deal in the world if you miss them, but yeah, you can definitely, oop, see, I didn't even notice that bit over the eye right there. They definitely can get away from you. Handy trick is just to flick the layer on and off to see which bits you're missing, so there's like a little junk down here that I missed as well. Now let's go ahead and add in the hot air balloon. So one more time, open as layers, balloons. Here you get to pick which one you want. First, alpha channel. I like this, pretty partial to this red balloon right here. Or actually this balloon. This is like your classic hot air balloon. I mean, if you think of hot air balloon, like, this is pretty much what I think of. I'm just going to draw like a rough little path around it. Oops. Don't need to be exact. You do like preferably not want to catch that much sky. And again, you can hold control to alter these path nodes to get the paths tool to kind of agree with you more. Let's go ahead and grab this basket. The basket will be on orange background, so we will need to fix that a little bit, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And let's first draw this over here. Good enough. So let's make that a selection, invert that, and delete the rest. And now let's move off the paths tool, grab the move tool. We still sort of have those bright orange highlights from the balloon. We do want to delete those. We can erase those off. Really small. Oops. This one's kind of tricky, but we'll get it. Alright, and then in order to get this out of here, we might need to go in really far. Get a really tiny brush. And yeah, maybe not even exact, but just something like that. Good enough. Zoom back out. And now that we have the balloon cut out, I went ahead and adjusted the colors a little bit, which you can do at your leisure at color, and then go color balance, and then you can ramp up the reds or tone down the greens or do whatever basically you would like to do on that layer. That's still a little high contrast for me, but since we have the balloon cut out, we'll go ahead and move it to around here. Then we can go colors, hue saturation actually, and let's tone the saturation of the balloon down quite a bit. Maybe not quite that much. So we still retain that nice red color, and we have the balloon right about there. Now the light is actually more or less okay. It might look better if the balloon was flipped though. So let's go ahead and go, or it's actually at the flip tool here. We'll flip it vertically. And yeah, the rest of the image flips with it as well, but not to worry. We can just move the balloon right over here and then delete any excess that comes with that right there. So we're very, very close to being done. Maybe a little bit farther over. We'll need to delete the excess again, but that's okay. Delete that one more time. Very, very close to being done. The one thing we want to add yet is a shadow that the balloon is casting on the face, just to add a little bit more depth in there yet. We'll go ahead and increase this brush size and maybe make like a black mark right about here. And tone the opacity of this mark down quite a bit. And maybe even set it on overlay. There we go. Okay, and the very, very last thing we need to do yet is just adjust the coloring of the image, and then we are basically done. Make a new layer on top of this, and then go to Layer, New from Visible, and that adds a layer right there. And now let's go ahead and add a gradient map. So first, the gradient we want is take a bright red and take the brightest possible blue, or like your typical like primary color blue, and select the gradient FG to BG, foreground to background, with the clockwise spectrum. And then we're going to go to Colors, Map, Gradient Map. And obviously that looks very, very exciting. We definitely don't want it to be that strong. That would ruin all of the hard work we just did. So we just tone the opacity down quite a bit. You can leave it on normal. You can experiment with whatever layer modes you'd like. Overlay even works. It gives it like a little bit less of a old-timey effect, although it does make them look quite purple. But you know, that's okay. So even overlay, I think I'm actually probably going to leave mine on normal though, because it almost gives it like a, I mean, basically an Instagram filter effect, right? Like it kind of flattens the image a little bit, and that's sort of an effect that I really like. So yeah, this is basically the image we're going to be creating in the end here today. Maybe tone the opacity down on that a little more just so we have a slight tinge of coloring. You can see the difference there. It sort of ties the entire thing together. Thanks for watching this tutorial. There will definitely be more coming in the future. I'm trying to do one a week. And yeah, I'm Braden, and I'll see you guys next time.